Hey, thanks for joining me here at EMP CycleWorks. I have about a three or four part series about me building a 131, Milwaukee 8 131 on this 2022 Road Glide. This is the first episode in that series, and it's going to be the teardown. When we tear this thing down and measure the pinion, this thing's getting a set of 4.310 bore cylinders from Fuelmoto, 12.5 to 1 compression, Jim's Maxell M837B cam. So stay tuned for part one of the Milwaukee 8 131 cubic inch build, the teardown. We're going to start this series just as we would any engine build by removing the saddlebags, making sure we store them in a safe location. Then we're going to remove the seat with the bolt that goes here and here. They're both number 3 Phillips screws on this particular model. And then the seat will pop off. Next we'll work on the gas tank. So there's covers over the front bolts, both sides. Disconnect the fuel line by pushing up on the little collar and pulling the fuel line out. And again, we have bolts in the back and bolts in the front that we have to remove. And then the whole gas tank will come off. They're 1/2-inch bolts. You can use a Torx also. And carefully remove the tank. This one is full of gas. Just a quick tip, if you ever take a bike to a shop, don't have it full of gas. Makes the tank, getting the tank off a lot harder. Next we'll work on the horn by removing the top mounts, which used to be motor mounts like on a twin cam, but not anymore. There's horn mounts. Remove those bolts. Disconnect the wires from the horn. And unhook the wires from the little wire clip that's in the back. And put everything into bags. That way it makes reassembly a lot easier if you know where everything goes. Now get the spark plugs disconnected. And there's a lot of wires on here we got to disconnect. Fuel injectors, knock sensors, map sensors, stuff like that. And while I'm on this side, I'm going to disconnect the rear oil hose on this bike. And sometimes you have to put a pair of pliers just to break loose the rubber from the nipple. And I always put a rag underneath this because it's going to drip. I really haven't figured out a way to make it not make a huge mess, but a rag seems to help. Now since we're on this side again, we're going to go with the front motor mount. There's a bolt at the top here. And there's a bolt on the head that we need to remove. Again, store them in a plastic bag. Keep everything tidy. It'll help out a lot, especially if you've never done this before. Now we have the oil pipe has 2 bolts that are 3/8 heads on the front and the rear. The front's kind of hard. I use a 3/8 swivel to get those off. Now back on the other side, the front motor mount on the head we remove, and that motor mount will come onto the left side of the bike. And once we get that motor mount removed, we can carefully pry the oil tube off the front and off the back and disconnect the line that goes to the cooler. And if we are careful here, we can get this thing out without scratching the heads. Sorry for the terrible angle here. I didn't realize my camera was tilted down a little bit. But carefully remove that. And now we're going to work on the exhaust. So there's a crossover bolt with a 1/2-inch head on it holding this clamp here. We remove that, and then a 15mm socket will disengage the clamp going to the crossover. And then these bolts and the muffler are 1/2-inch. Remove those, and holding the muffler, you don't want it to fall, and then you can wiggle it and pull and wiggle it and pull, and eventually it'll come free. Just be really careful. Now let's do the air cleaner. Take off the sock, the rain sock, and then on this particular one there's 2 bolts in the front holding a little beauty cover on, and then there's 2 more bolts that hold the air filter to the outer housing here. And those come off, and the air cleaner will come off as well. Now the breather tubes come off, and there's a 7/16 bolt behind those, and 3 Allen head bolt holding the air cleaner to the manifold. So these are the 7/16 here I'm removing. Those are the actual breather bolts. Those are hollow, so you got to be careful and don't go crazy. You never want to use an impact or anything on those because they can break easily. And then once that's off, we can disconnect the throttle by wire connector down here at the bottom, and it has a little safety tab that you have to push away or push down like that, and then you can push in the tab to take off the connector. And then the knock sensor, and then we're going to get the manifold off. And I have a special tool here that I use to break them loose. It's a Allen that has like a weird angle bent in it, and it's a ball Allen on the other side. And once I break them loose, then I can use a long ball Allen, my snap-on tool, to remove the bolts. Same thing in the rear, and then we can carefully wiggle the manifold out. And this is a 2022, and they're still using this plastic manifold for some reason. I don't get it, but we're using a 64 millimeter throttle body on the build here, so that's going away. And they use an ungodly amount of Loctite on these floorboard bolts for some reason. They're always a pain to get off when they're brand new. So starting with the exhaust, we're going to take the heat shields off. It's a 5/16 nut. You can use a flathead screwdriver to get the clamps off the heat shields and then remove them one at a time. Now we need to disconnect the O2 sensors from the back, under the back side cover here, and disconnect them, reroute them. They're connected down at the bottom frame, and there's also behind the rear brake, there's a little zip tie with a little plastic rivet that we need to disconnect. And then I use a 1/2 inch swivel and a 1/4 inch drive snap-on tool to remove the exhaust nuts one at a time. And I don't show it here, but there's also an exhaust nut right in the middle that we disconnect, and then get the bolts off the muffler just like we did on the other side. And we can carefully remove this, being careful not to damage the motor or the frame. So we're going to get the spark plugs off, get ready to take apart the top end here. So I'm going to jack up the bike so I can spin the rear wheel. This way I can put it into 6th gear. And with the plugs out, I can spin the motor over, and that'll become apparent why I need to do that in a few minutes here. So we get the rocker boxes off, and here's another special tool that I use to get the ones that are under the frame in the rear. So once the bolts are off, you can pull the covers off. And then we can remove the rocker arms. Now I put the rear in the top dead center compression to unload the rocker so we could take them apart, and I'll show you how to do that for the front. Pull the push rods out, and then if you watch the front intake, it'll go up, push rod 2 will go up and then down, and then that's pretty much top dead center or approaching top dead center, and the valve train is unloaded, so we can now take it apart. So remove the bolts, the rocker arms and the shafts, get rid of the push rods, and then now the breathers, and there's a 3/16 Allen that we remove that hold the breathers down, and they're also held in by an O-ring, so sometimes it can be a pain to get out, but there's a little hook or a little tab that we can grab onto and pull them off. Now there's 4 3/8 headed bolts, and then 1 7/16 in the middle that we remove to get the lower rockers off. And once those are off, if we tilt them towards the front of the bike, usually we can get them past the springs. The springs kind of get in the way of those sometimes. And the same thing with the front, if you remove the front of it first. So now I'm going to do the cam chest. So I break the bolts loose with my ratchet, and then I can use an impact to take them off the rest of the way. And then here's one of the reasons why we have it in gear, is we can hold the rear brake and use that to lock the motor, and that way we can break loose these the pinion and the cam sprocket bolts. Once we break them loose, I'll use my snap-on zip gun and zip them out. And then we're going to get rid of the tensioner here. Just a 27 Torx bit. Pull off the timing set. And then same thing with these 3/16 Allens. I will break them loose with my ratchet and the lifter block covers as well. And then zip them out with my snap-on zip gun here, or my snap-on battery-powered ratchet. And before we pull out the cam chest, we need the cam plate. We need to get rid of the push rod tubes, the lifter covers, and the lifters. That way we can pull out the cam. And the push rod tubes come out by unsnapping the top clip and just collapsing them, and they'll come right out. And then remove the bolts for the covers, and then we tap them with a little mallet just to break them loose. We pull out the lifters. And this is getting new lifters, but I'm just going to keep these. Normally I would mark which way they go and soak them in oil. So in this case, you know, to measure the crank, if the crank's no good, then it's all going back together. But pull off the cam plate, the stock cam, and then the stock oil pump, which is going to go back in. This is a 2022, so the oil pump is updated and actually pretty good, a pretty good setup for a Harley part. See, it's got the seal on the back. Now we're going to check the pinion run out, and this one is just over 5 thousandths, so too much to run an aftermarket oil pump, but just fine for the Harley setup. So we're going to run that, and then we're going to take off the heads, break them loose, and then pull out the bolts. To speed things up, I use my ratchet, my battery ratchet. Pull the heads off. Just tap them a little bit with your hand. You should break them loose. Some of the Kinetic gaskets really seal on there, but this is all factory. This is a brand new bike. Time to remove the cylinders. So we pull them up a little bit just to expose the spigot bore here. And I'm going to stuff a rag in there just so nothing falls in there, to try to prevent anything from falling in there. And then carefully remove the cylinder. And sometimes you have to, on these, you have to like get the spigot over the stud a little bit, and then you can pull it off. It's kind of tricky on the rear there. Not impossible though. Same thing with the front. Pull it up a little bit, push the rag in, and then we can pull off the cylinder the rest of the way. And I have these little pieces of PVC that I use to protect the piston from the studs. We're not reusing these pistons, but this is just good practice anyways. The pin clips can be kind of a pain to remove. And this is why we put rags in, and I didn't have enough rags in here, and that clip went down into the motor. So that was great. You live and you learn. I always thought the rag would catch the clip, but there was just enough space there. It fell down to the bottom of the motor, so oh well. Remove the piston, and then get your magnet out and start fishing. Luckily I saw it go in there, so you know, this was a lot easier. I knew it was down in there, so it was just a matter of finding it, really. And luckily I was able to find it, and yep, there it is. Whew. Oh boy. Worst case is if that thing goes flying, you don't know where it went. That's my nightmare. Because you don't know if it's in the motor, and if you don't know, that motor's coming apart. And that wraps up the teardown. Watch out for part 2 of this series where we build the top end. Thanks for joining me here at EMP Cycle Works. And hey, if you like the video and comment and subscribe. It helps out a lot. Thank you.